Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Phil Cook, president of the North American Coalition of Christian Admissions Professionals, to talk about the admissions and enrollment churn all our institutions are facing. How are we preparing for the impending enrollment cliff? I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and we are honored to have as our guest this week, Phil Cook, who is the president of, and I've got to pause and I got to make sure I read it correctly, the North American Coalition of Christian Admissions Professionals.
That's it. You got it. Perfect.
All right.
Yes.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We all know that higher education is a turbulent sector. We're going to talk about that. Several of my previous podcast episodes have been around this reality. And if we were to look at it, a lot of that turbulence is captured in the context of our enrollment and admissions offices. So I've invited Phil in to talk about that turbulence within that context and help us identify potential opportunities for both biblical and Christian higher education. So with that, Phil, thank you for joining us.
Philip, I'm glad to be here. I'm especially glad because this is the bald beard crew, man. I like that crew. It's a good crew to be a part of.
We could be brothers, I think.
That's right. That's right.
In fact, I've often joked, one of these times I just want to show up to work with a wig on and just see what happens, right? How do people actually react?
I know we've talked about this before privately, but I wish I'd have given into it years ago. I waited just a couple years ago. I was, the receding hairline, bald spot guy. Finally, I said, and if my wife likes it, I like it. So thankfully, she's good with it.
So here's a message to all the comb-overs out there. Just take it off. Just take it off. It's okay.
Go for it, man.
That's
it's
right.
liberating.
That's right.
Let's go.
That's right. It's our own little club. So we're going to get into some of the specific questions related to admissions and that turbulence. Before we do that, just so our audience can get to know you a little bit, talk to us about a defining moment that God used in your life that propelled you forward in either your personal or your professional life.
I'm a PK myself. Grew up in the church, born in West Virginia, Pennsylvania. I could talk about church experience, but all I knew was church. But in the context of what we're doing today, talking about higher ed, there's a experience that I had in my first year as a professional at a biblical or a Christ-centered university. I was a dorm supervisor. We called them residence directors in 1993. And there was across the street from where my dorm was, our building had a fire in the middle of the night. It was an arsonist situation on our campus. I'm 23 years old with 158 freshman guys in this dorm.
Wow.
A newlywed of 1 year making my way. And in the middle of the night, arsonists came and tried to destroy and hurt students on our campus. This moment, this was both personally and professionally galvanizing to me. It galvanized me to this work. It was my clarion call. It was my moment where the Lord was calling me to do this work. No one died. There were serious injuries. The Lord restored. It was a catapult. It was a catalyst, a springboard for growth on our campus, both in enrollment, but in terms of student engagement and student success and faculty recruitment. This event, which was very, very pressure-filled and intense, is the thing that I look back on that, again, brought me to say, okay, God has called you to this. This is your work. This is your people. Nothing stop you from doing that work. So that fire in the middle of the night, again, not my dorm, but the professionalism and the personal relationships out of that really changed my life and has been an important part of my work in Christian biblical higher ed for more than 30 years.
Yeah, such a beautiful story. And it's our story of redemption. God has taken ultimately us and redeemed us through the blood of Christ. But he also redeems difficult situations like a fire and an arsonist. And I'm sure there were other lives touched that was catalytic for the students involved and staff and whoever else. But then also for you, that was like, you know what? God used that to kind of just pull together and say, this is what I'm called to. This is what I'm going to pursue. That's beautiful.
To this day, Philip, when I see people, they'll say, Phil, they don't have to tell me who they are because I know who they were. And out of that fire are healings, deliverance, miracles that go on again that have impacted many and hundreds and thousands of people.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yep.
You and I came to the presidency of our associations pretty much about the same time. It was during COVID. And it's been a fun journey for both of us as we've kind of gotten to know our associations and trying to figure out how best to serve our member institutions. And I just want to say, Phil, you've done a phenomenal job from a distance looking at what NACCAP is doing. You inherited a position, somebody who we all love and respect and had been there for many years, Chant Thompson, but you have come in and Chant did a great job of handoff to you, and you've put your fingerprints on it. And I think you've done a good job. And I'll just put this out there. If you're listening to this and you're not a NACCAP member, and this podcast isn't about selling things, but I'll do it. I really believe as many as we can, ABHE institutions ought to be members of NACCAP. They provide such great professional development for admissions leaders, but then also the statistical reports that happen. It's just so helpful to benchmark. And it actually helps all of us at ABHE the more that we have, because then we can trust some of the statistics that we have enough that those benchmarks actually matter. And we didn't set this up beforehand. That's just from my perspective as president.
I appreciate it very much. I thank you for the kind words. We are building on the shoulders of a patriarch who dedicated his life to biblical or Christian higher education. Yeah. And in that regard, it's been easy. And it's also been exhilarating for us to see the progress we're making. So thank you for saying that.
Great work. Okay, so let's get into this. Top 3 observations as you scan the current state of biblical and Christian higher education, enrollment specifically, heading into this fall, 2024. What are your top 3 observations?
Well, one of the things I hadn't thought about saying until you just said this, but it's a very real observation that we have a succession, transition, leadership issue among our institutions. Yeah. Not just at the presidential level, which I know you're familiar with. I don't run in too many circles of presidential leadership, but the retiring or the absence of leadership at the highest level in the C-suite, I think our friends at ABHE call it. That's very much true on campuses across the country, but it's a very real current issue for admissions leadership in the gaps in that regard.
Because I would guess out of all of the offices on a campus, the most transient has got to be enrollment offices.
Without a doubt. Philip, if you would ask every ABHE school, and then for me, every NACCAP school, to every director of admissions and say, or VP for enrollment, when did you first start thinking you were going to be an admissions person or admissions gal? And they would say, never. It didn't happen. For me, it was, I loved the Lord with all my heart, soul, and mind. I loved my alma mater that changed my life. And I love people. Where do I sign up for this? Yeah. So it is transient that admissions staffs are looking for recent graduates who have that experience, who can articulate it, and who can face the pressure of what's happening now. When I started in 1997, the admissions work, there was very real pressure in enrollment for Christian institutions, but that pressure is times 10. It's just pegged to the top now with all that we're talking about with what's going on. So there is a real gap in enrollment leadership. That's the first thing I see going into throughout at this time in spring, headed to fall. Our friend Tim Fuller did that research for us. He did the research that we provide through NACCAP membership. And one of his takeaways was it's open season on enrollment leaders. That is to say, when a new president comes in, she or he may decide we've got to change it up. We've got to find a different person. And that's a very real and understandable position from a CEO standpoint when we inherit a staff and inherit new people and different ways of doing things. But the change in admissions leadership, the transient nature of it, I don't know about you, Philip, but I'm not getting wealthy doing this. I didn't get into this or do this because we're getting paid a lot of money, and nor do admissions counselors. They are generally the entry-level position with arguably the most pressure-packed role on a campus. I'm not minimizing the CFO's role or the faculty role in any way, but I'm talking about what we're talking about, the context, the environment of where we are.
If you step back and take a look at it, you have to make the observation that's real. And there's no office that's more important than another on a campus. They all play their role and work together. Right. But it's your sales team. And if you think about it, we have given our sales team, who are so critical, a lot of responsibility, a lot of pressure, and they're 23, 24 years old.
Which is why the pressure, all the lights, all the pressures turn to the directors of admissions, the VPs for enrollment, to say, we've got to train and equip these newer professionals to do their jobs well. It takes a year or two for an
Mhm.
admissions counselor to get her feet, to get her rhythm,
Mhm.
to be able to understand the nuances of this work. It is, yes, it's people centered and just as people related, but there's a grind to it. There's a hard work
Mhm.
element to this that just says the next phone call, the next visit, the next family campus tour, the next project, the next marketing project. All those things are very real. So really there is an admissions leadership gap and
Mhm.
vacancy, which is a great opportunity for the work that we get to
Yeah,
do. And we're privileged
it
to do
is.
that. But that's the first thing that comes to my mind. The other thing, which we'll get to a second, is Philip, the enrollment cliff is real.
Yeah.
And we know it, and it's out there, right? It's like the old geometry proofs. You had the given,
Mhm.
in our space, and maybe not for all your listeners, maybe not for the faculty member on a campus who's been working and been entrenched in the classroom, but the enrollment cliff is real. Just this week, another school announced it was closing down in Alabama, not one of our member institutions, but one with roots in our tradition.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
faith-based institution, two other schools merging last week. So the enrollment pressure and the enrollment cliff is real, and the leadership dearth, the leadership
Yeah.
gap is also very real for our work too.
Yeah. Yeah. I broke out in cold sweats there when you mentioned geometry and proofs. That goes. Whew, yeah.
I didn't
Not
like
my
it at
cup
all,
of
but
tea.
the one thing I remember is there was a given at the top. I've done a sermon or two on that, Philip, because what is given in our lives as we face a fire, as we face leading a new organization, as we face enrollment pressure, what's the given? Well, I won't get down the hole, but the given is God's grace and love and mercy for
Yeah.
each of us. That's what's the given. So that's why I remembered. Otherwise, I don't remember much else
Well,
about it.
I'm glad you got something out of 10th grade math
Yeah.
that you could apply later in life.
It's
So,
true. It's true.
you have opportunity to get on a lot of campuses. You served in this area. You have a global seat just like I do, so we're able to see a lot of things. So without disclosing where
Sure.
perhaps these
Yep.
things happen, three biggest consistent mistakes that you see enrollment offices making.
Yeah. And specifically in the Christian world, a couple of things emerge. First would be, and I just mentioned about the pressure on admissions folks, but it's also okay to have a standard of excellence that meets the challenges that are before us. So
Hmm.
I have a business undergraduate degree. I went to seminary. My doctoral work is in higher education administrative and leadership. So I think it's a good mix for what I'm doing. But that business background tells me that one of the things, we have a product. We are selling, as you mentioned, we're selling a product here. So one of the mistakes is just not doing your work well.
Yeah.
It's not just doing things with excellence, whether it's a podcast or whether it's a campus visit, whatever it might be. We have to do things with excellence. So I will say there have been some observations across the board that the level of excellence, level of dedication, and in many times it's rooted in a very Christian, genteel spirit of, well, we want to serve and encourage one another. Well, the fact is, if we want to survive and thrive, we've got to look at this with a dispassionate laser focus of doing things with excellence.
Yeah.
I told a story once. I was on that campus that I worked at for 28 years before coming to lead NACCAP. And one of the stories we told was about a student who failed all his classes his first year. He was on fire for God. He was loving the Lord, and he came and he was doing Jericho marches. That might tell you a little bit about my background. If I get into a little bit, don't want to concern listeners, but around his dorm, he was going to prayer meetings, but he wasn't going to class. He made F's for Jesus, is what he did.
Huh.
And he missed and he came back and finished and went on to grad school. A wonderful story. But the point was, we have to, just because we're believers, I heard one person say, pray like it all depends on the Lord and work like it all depends on you. So one observation, Philip, to be very direct about our what I see on the country is we just got to do things better. We got to do the work, and that's not easy. The other thing is there's a real trend, and I understand, and I'm a data informed guy, but some folks are getting kind of lost in the weeds of the data, of all the data. My 2.5 years, almost 3 years now in this role, reminded me our success on our campus, where we went from about 986 students to more than 5,000 students in about a 30-year span. Our success, we absolutely used data. We used information. Of course we did. But this is a people-based business. I saw a quote that Truett Cathy said about Chick-fil-A. He said, people think we're in the chicken business. We're not. We're in the people business.
That's right.
This is what I think higher ed is too, and particularly, specifically, admissions and enrollment work.
Yeah.
My answer's a little longer, so I can't get to 3 every time, but those are the first two. We got to do things with excellence. And we've got to take care of people. This is relationship building.
Yeah.
This is what invigorates me every day. I mean, I don't know if I'm waxing poetic or not, or inspirational at all. But the fact is, it's what drives me.
Mm-hmm.
It's what drives me, because Christian higher education changed my life, and now I get the chance every day to tell that story to other people.
Yeah, something that you said reminded me of, and I agree with you. I draw a distinction between data-driven and data-informed decisions. It's all semantics at one level, but the reason why I differentiate between the two is data-driven removes the human element, which sometimes is not necessarily reflected in the data itself. And I've been in situations where we have spreadsheets and we count and we recount and we look at standard deviations and we forget that we're supposed to block and tackle. At the end of the day, admissions officers have got to be out there recruiting students. Be informed, use the data to inform, but that sets up the work of admissions. The work of admissions isn't to count. The work of admissions is to build relationships and bring students in.
And I'm not sure we'll have a contest to see how many Tim Fuller quotes we can refer in our conversation, because this could go for hours. But it is the blocking and tackling. It is the I'm a sports guy and I'm a frustrated athlete in that regard. And again, I do think it's semantics, but it's a very important distinction to be made. Mm-hmm. You know, I was on a campus recently where I heard a CFO and a president talking about this, and the CFO was going on about the spreadsheets and the Excel spreadsheet. And after this meeting was over, the president kind of leaned over me and said, you know, that was coming from a guy who's never had to sit down across the table from a parent and tell them what this means and why you need to come send your student here. Yes, the money's important, but it's the relational piece of it. So the semantics are important. I'm not data-driven. I'm mission-driven. It's what I am. I'm people-driven, and I'm data-informed. I think that's a mistake that I see out there as well, because so many people talk about it now. We're not seeing success. We must not be using the data correctly. Fair, and that's true. But at the end of the day, blocking and tackling means we sit down with people, we look them in the eye, and we tell them how our institution will change their life, and I believe it will.
Yep. And there's all kinds of thought about this. And I see it as a tension within higher education, because it's hard to, in scholarly contexts, use business language, but you can boil it down. If you take your cost of attendance at your institution per year, multiply it by 4, that's the product that you're selling to parents. And parents are looking at it that way. And I think sometimes we're unfair to parents and families who are considering this, because they're the ones. And the way I always contextualize it is, when was the last time you were out buying $100,000 product? Didn't you ask questions about it? Didn't you want to make sure that the value proposition being made was actually going to be fulfilled in that student's experience? And I think that's all part of this conversation.
This is a decision that lives up to the billing.
Yeah.
In terms of the decisions that one makes in life, the decision to accept Christ, of course, that's first. For some folks, they might frame it in the context of with whom are you going to spend the rest of your life in a marriage relationship? What are you going to do in your job? But where you go to college, that choice measures up to the billing, right? So you should absolutely look at the money and so forth. But I saw a colleague of ours talk about how there are families out there who, when you make the case, they are willing to make the investment or the sacrifice to send their son or daughter to a place where their lives will be changed, and that's through relationships. Yeah. Yes, it's relationships with students, but mostly this person's survey and research for this as a vendor, they were saying, but mostly it's about what adults are going to be standing in front of my son or daughter to reinforce, to challenge my daughter in her thinking about her faith, but at the end of the day, to acknowledge the source of truth and the source of our strength and all the source of the things that we're going through. So I do think families will make that sacrifice or the investment, but we've got to be able to make the case to them, and that's best done in relationship.
And connect it to what we said earlier. We're giving this responsibility to 23-year-old students. And I think it just, to the leaders that are listening, presidents and academic officers and enrollment officers, pay attention to that front line, value them, and pour whatever you can in them, because they're the ones that are carrying that message. So critical that they're doing it right.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. The news has been, I should say, the alarm bells have been going on in the news for the last several months around the redesign of the FAFSA processing. It's been delayed and delayed and delayed. And the purpose of this is not to be negative towards the U.S. Department of Education, because we don't see the other side of it. I can't even imagine taking on a project to redesign an application process for FAFSA. So let's leave that piece of it aside. But is this a short-term problem? Or do you see that there could be some longer term implications from this delay, that colleges are just now getting trickles of FAFSA applications submitted?
One of my colleagues on our staff, and again, I appreciate you being so gracious in your comments about what NACCAP is doing in my role, but it's the people that are doing this work every day. We have an outstanding group. One is Dr. Molly Smith. Dr. Smith was a VP for enrollment on a campus like I was, and we were commenting in our weekly one-on-one meeting yesterday that we missed the on-campus experience so much. It was invigorating to us. But at this time, we don't miss it because of the FAFSA implications, because of the uncertainty. We just talked about the investment of what it is. Families are making a decision. In some cases, they're making them blind. So I do think absolutely the short-term implications are, like, my chest would get tight, hard for me to breathe if I on campus and our enrollment leaders are saying as much. But what our campuses are doing is they've been proactive. They can't sit back. So most of our campuses, I would say, have been proactive, finding other ways to communicate with families. The terminology is different. You can get into the weeds with FAFSA, with financial aid acronyms and information. So they're changing some of those data points and so forth. But being proactive, finding a way to get award letters to students, even projecting and estimating has been important, but also communication. The schools that are facing this with uncertainty from the feds and what's going on, it's been an opportunity for them to establish trust with these students and families. And in that regard, we hope it will sustain them through the enrollment cycle. So I do think it's absolutely a short-term issue. A few years ago, when FAFSA or financial aid went to prior year, again, not to get in the weeds, it used to be you do your FAFSA in January from 2 years ago income. So the federal government made the change, on the most recent year income, and you'd have to wait until December to do your FAFSA. Well, they made a change to go 2 years ago income. That was a good change by the feds. It was a better way to do it. And I hope I don't lose my Republican conservative card when I say that. In this case, it was a good decision. Ultimately, I believe a cleaner, more concise version of FAFSA will long-term be a benefit to our families and ultimately to our institutions. Now, the devil's in the details, all the behind the scenes things. How are you predicting Pell Grant? Need-based aid is critical to many of our organizations, many of our institutions who are enrolling first-gen students who have need-based. I'm a full Pell Grant kid. I got a full Pell Grant to go. I could not have done it without that, and student loans, I might add. That's another one that I get on. I'll do that later. But so ultimately, I do think it will be a good thing. How long? It's going to be hard to predict. Hopefully, it'll just be this cycle and not next year's. And hopefully, there won't be too much of an enrollment dip in this year's cycle to affect the long term. But the pressure on our personal and our people, that we've got to be aware of that and continue to resource and help our people.
Absolutely, because it is frustrating for them, because they know that there's going to be a backlog of packaging that's going to have to happen, and the applications literally are just trickling in. So they will. I was speaking with Barbara Mystic at NICU, National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, there in Washington, D.C., and she shared concern for disadvantaged students who are more reliant on the Pell Grant, because even have been some glitches in the application process, and there's a sense of just giving up. Like, I'm just not even going to spend my time doing this. And it'll be interesting, like you said, to see, like, it's a pig in a python, right? Because if it does affect low enrollment for this fall of 2024, that will have an impact in 25, 26, 27 as that cohort of students work through the traditional 4-year cycle. So it could,
especially coming after COVID, Philip, whenever we're still coming out of that, some of our schools to have this back to back, that gives me great concern for institutions. But again, those schools that we're trying to be being proactive, trying to be creative and establishing trust. It's the only way when you can't control those things. So hopefully we'll mitigate the damage, and we'll see on the other side a better FAFSA. That's my hope. And I do believe my gut, my instinct, and my mind tells me that it will be better down the road, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So this is a competition for how many times we can mention the name of Tim Fuller, a dear friend of both of ours. So he was real big. Obviously, a lot of people are big on the enrollment cliff. I remember Tim in some of the earlier days, he was talking, this is coming, this is coming, this is coming. And it's been interesting to see in rooms when he first started talking about it, it's just like, now, what are you talking about?
Right.
To now it's like, okay, we know the enrollment cliff is coming, right? So it's almost this oversaturation, but we're 1 year, we're starting to see it, and we're officially 1 year away from it, 2025, when it really starts to hit. And the long-term prognosis is not great because our birth rates continue to decline in the United States. So this is really a redefining moment. So what adjustments have you seen colleges and universities make in anticipation of the cliff?
Well, we were referencing friends of ours, and I've got one more I'd reference. And if he were here, I think he'd maybe give me an A for this class today. And that is Bart Kaler, who would say, again, the enrollment cliff is real. Saw a report, might have been Bart's this week, that said more than 2/3 of prospective students now say the single, not surprisingly, most important part of their decision-making process is university website. That it is the most important recruitment tool. And second part of that research was a personalized experience. So what I'm seeing on the enrollment cliff is, yes, it's real. There's going to be less students from which you can recruit. The general propensity to see that the return on higher education is worth it. The resistance to student loan and student indebtedness, which is, again, another topic for another time, because, again, I would say the only way I was able to go to a place that changed my life was to have student loans, responsibly paying them back earlier than I had to pay them back, because God blessed what we were doing. Okay. But the personalized information, so website on the enrollment cliff, because the market is shrinking. Website's got to be up to speed. That's hard for smaller schools with limited budgets. But I don't know that I did a good a job on my campus as I should have regarding marketing. The website, personalized experience. And if we were to take 10, 12, 15 of our ABHE NACCAP schools here and put the talking points on these schools, they would sound really similar. Faculty that care, Christian curriculum, chapel, small size, all those things would be very similar. But the challenge for each individual institution is to find what truly differentiates you from others. And it may just be the people on your campus offer the kind of experience that differentiate you from other places. But a school for the enrollment cliff must find what differentiates them from among the public and the secular institutions, but even from our friends, even from our other schools that are with us, because the facts are, the survival rate's going to be difficult. It's not doom and gloom. One of my strengths in one of these inventories I've taken is positivity. But the fact is, it's going to happen. There are mergers, there'll be closures, they will continue. But for an institution to give itself the best chance of survival, they must utilize their websites and do it effectively. They must have personalized experience, and they've got to find something that differentiates, that distinguishes them from other institutions and other places. And if they do that, boy, it gives you the best chance at being successful. That's our prayer. And that's what we get to do every day. And we get to support institutions that are doing that.
Yeah, no, that's great. You said something in there that I think is so true. And it's a fallacy to think that our Christian colleges, our Bible colleges, that are our greatest competition are each other. The data actually shows us that our greatest competition are community colleges and state universities. And so facing the enrollment cliff, still the vast majority of Christian eligible seniors graduating from high school, the majority are still going to secular institutions, not to Christian and Bible colleges.
I was on a panel a couple of, when I first started this role, and I made that same claim because I was basing on national clearinghouse data and my institution's experience. The majority are going to community colleges and state schools. We were competing with other schools that were Christian schools, but the majority not. And it is true. The greatest competition, there is still market share out there to be had if we can make the case and we can do the work that this experience on our campus will change your life, not just here, but eternally. That's what the invigorates me to do our work together.
And connect that to then what you said about the importance of institutions differentiating their message. It may be hard for them to differentiate the message from one Christian college or university to the other, but you can make a pretty compelling differentiation when you're differentiating from secular institutions, state universities, and community colleges.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with it.
Well, we're getting to the end. We have 1 minute to wrap things up. So just in 1 minute, Phil, what would you say, what's the single greatest opportunity for our institutions in the midst of all of this enrollment churn that we've been talking about?
It's what we were just finishing up saying, Philip. Again, I'm a frustrated athlete, and one of the great performers of superstars, they say that pressure is a privilege. That you get the chance, that I get the chance. We're in the crosshairs of this, not discouraging, but the kind of onerous, kind of out there enrollment cliff and what's going on. But we have such a great opportunity. It's such a great opportunity to just not in our institutions, which I do believe in, but also about the gospel. I'm in this work because the lordship of Jesus Christ and my personal relationship with him changed my life. I didn't talk about this event when I was a young boy at 15 years old, when our family almost fell apart for sin in our family, but for the grace of God and for mercy and healing. The grace of the Lord and the blood of Christ healed my heart, and it's invigorated me to now share this story with students all around the country. So the opportunity is just that. There's never been a better time to share the good news of the gospel of Christ, or the gospel of ABHE, or the gospel of NACCAP. So I'm privileged to be in this position and this pressure. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to shoulder to shoulder, to put our elbows together, put our shoulders to the wheel, whatever cliche you want to use, to do the work with ABHE and our other friends in the institution, because the times are, it's worth, the work is worth it. And we've got a lot of good work to do. So I think that's the greatest opportunity for us.
Fantastic, Phil. You've been fantastic. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your wisdom. I really appreciate you joining us on our show.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Until next time, stay kingdom focused.